We're going to study Chav Zayin, and we'll start with Dorash Bar Kapora, which is the third line down from the top.
Okay.
My Dichsiv, what does the pasuk mean? And we're analyzing a pasuk in Tanakh in Malachim Beis. This is the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, the first Beis Hamikdash, at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. Yisrofes Beis Hashem, Ves Beis Hamelech, Ves Kol Bate Yerushalayim, Ves Kol Beis Bayis Gadol Soraf, or Beis Gadol Soraf Ba'esh. So Bar Kapar now goes through the pasuk piece by piece. It says that he burnt down Beis Hashem. What's Beis Hashem? Zeb Beis Hamikdash. Fine. Then it says Beis Hamelech. Elu Palterin Shel Melech. This is the palace. Beis Kol Bate Yerushalayim Kimashma'an. All the house of Jerusalem. He destroyed all the house in Jerusalem. The Eskol Beis, or Beis Gadol Saraf Ba'esh, what is that referring to? Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shu ben Levi, Machlokes Amoraim, how to understand Bar Kapara with regard to Beis Gadol Saraf. Chad Omar, Mokom Shemegadlin Bo Torah. And this is a reference to the Beis HaMedrash, the place where we study Torah. Chad Omar, according to the other opinion, Makom Shemegadlin Bo Tefillah. It's a Beis HaKnesses. Now, it would seem that Bayis Gadol is the highest level outside the Beis HaMikdash. And we have here a machlokes. What is the higher level? Is the highest level Tefillah or Torah? If it's Torah, then Makom Shemegadlin Bo Torah, that's going to be the Bayis Gadol, the highest level. If it's Tefillah, then it's Makom Shemegadlin Bo Tefillah. The language Megadlin Bo is very appropriate in the case of Torah, because we grow in Torah, we move from one level to the other. What does it mean, Megadlin Bo Tefillah? And apparently, even when it comes to Tefillah, to davening, to prayer, we climb, and we need constant training and work to improve ourselves and to intensify our tefillos and bring them to the highest level. Now the Gemara analyzes these two opinions. What are the sources for these respective opinions? Mandi Omer Torah, if I hold Torah to be the highest level, and that's the Beis Gadol, Tichsiv, we're going to base ourselves on a pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi, and the pasuk says, Hashem chafetz samad tzidko, Yagdil Torah v'yadir. And it means that Yagdil is the verb, the shorish and the noun of which is Gadol. And it's referring to Torah and the study therein. Therefore, the greatest Yagdil, the greatest Gadol, in terms of Bayis Gadol, would be a Makom Shemegadlin Bo Torah. Umandi Omer Tefillah, Tichsiv, he has a pasuk in Malachim Beis, and it has to do with Aram and a nevuah of Elisha. Aram was, at that point in history, the greatest adversary of the Jewish people. And they threatened to take over Yerushalayim. And all this was prophesied in advance by Elisha. The Melech at that point in time was Melech Achav. And Elisha's second sidekick, his name was Gehazi, not a very popular person in our, in our literature. He was the shliach of Elisha. He was the shliach of Achav to find out about Elisha. Tell me more and more about Elisha. I heard he's a great Navi. He's capable of doing wonders and bringing about miracles. Echazi, I want you to report to me about the greatness of your Rebbe, of your master Elisha. Saprano Hagdolos Asher Asa Elisha. Tell me all the great things that Elisha has accomplished in his life, the miraculous things. And Ve'Elisha di Ovid Berachme Hu di Ovid, because I know that what Elisha accomplished was through tefillah. And God has a taiva for the tefillos and tzaddikim. The tzaddikim have a tremendous power up in Shemayim with the tefillos. And therefore, tell me about the great accomplishments of Elisha, the wondrous miracles that he brought about through his tefillah. And this means that Saprano Gedolos, the word Gedolos, is a conjugation of the word Gadol. So when it says Bayis Gadol, and we're looking back in the same pasuk in Malachim Beis, in which Nebuchadnezzar burns the Bayis Gadol, it's a reference to Beis HaTfilah, to Makom Shemegadlevo Tfilah. And now the Gemara wants to say, in this machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi, is there any way that we could pin down which one of these two Amoraim holds Torah and which holds Tefillah? And truth be told, all we need is to prove one, because then by process of elimination, the other one belongs to the ulterior. So to Stayim, we want to prove that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would be Torah. Why? What statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would prove that he puts Torah on the top? That's the Gadol, the Bais Gadol. The Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Beis HaKnesses, Mutter Lasos, Lasoso Beis HaMedrash. We have a principle in halacha called Mailim B'Kodesh, Below Moridim B'Kodesh. We're allowed to sell a Beis HaKnesses or reconstruct it in such a way that now it will serve as a Beis HaMedrash. It means that the Kedusha of Beis HaMedrash is greater than that of a Beis HaKnesses. And therefore, Shmamina, we derive from this the conclusion that the higher level of sanctity is that of Torah. Torah is a greater sanctity than Tefillah. Now, there's something here that should bother us. Elsewhere in the Gemara, in a different Masechet, in Masechet Brachos, the Gemara tells us that when Abaye found out about the greatness of the Beis HaMedrash, he changed his minhag. He used to daven in a Beis HaKnesses and learn in a Beis HaMedrash, and then he changed his minhag, and he took it upon himself to daven in the Beis HaMedrash because of its great kedusha. However, we should realize that that Gemara needs explanation. It is not to be equated with our sugya, nor does the Gemara try to make an analogy between the two. When you're dealing with where to daven and where should be the highest level of a makom kedusha for tefillah, so your tefillah will rise up on high, that has nothing to do with selling one for the other Beis Knesses for a Beis HaMedrash. The halach of selling has to do with kedusha, Ma'ila b'Kodesh. And our Gemara, based on Rabbi Shua ben Levi, comes to the conclusion that the Ma'ila b'Kodesh, to go from a lower level of kedusha and sell a Beis Knesses to a higher level of kedusha, that of kedusha Torah, that's the Beis Gadol. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that I should daven in a Beis HaKnesses. I'm sorry, that I should daven in a Beis HaMedrash. No. Every makom, every location specifically has its designation. And the designation of a Beis HaKnesses is for the mitzvah of Tefillah, of a Beis HaMedrash for the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So that Gemara about Abaye has to be understood, but it has nothing to do with Kedushas HaMakom, and it should not be a comparison of two levels of Kedusha. Our sugi about selling a Beis HaKnesses for the sake of buying a Beis HaMedrash, that's about the Kedusha, the different levels of Kedusha. But if you ask me where, in other words, let's say, for example, a person is going to tell me that he's going to eat the matzah not at home, but in a Beis HaKnesses. Another person can say, well, don't eat the matzah in a Beis HaKnesses, eat it in a Beis HaMedrash. And a third person will say, well, eat it in a Beis HaMikdash, going up from one kedusha to the other. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. We don't choose to do a mitzvah where the kedusha is greater. And for example, you bring a carbon, you bring a carbon to the Azar. You don't have to bring it to the Kodesh, to the Heichal or the Kodesh Kedoshim. The Azar is the designated place for bringing a carbon. The Mishnah says, "Avol machru Torah lo yikchu sfarim," that if you have a Sefer Torah, it would be a violation of Ma'alim B'Kodesh if you would use it and sell it in order to purchase sfarim. Sfarim means a Sefer like Shmuel or like Malachim, any of the books of the Tanakh. And they used to write a separate scroll for each book of Tanakh. But a Sefer Torah is an entire Torah, and it has the highest level of sanctity, and therefore would be a violation of Ma'alim B'Kodesh. It would be, in fact, Morida B'Kodesh if you would take the funds at the sale of a Beis HaKnesses and direct them towards the purchase of Sfarim. Iboiluhu ma'u limkar Sefer Torah yashan likach bo chadash. And I sell an old Sefer Torah for the sake of buying a new one. And here the Gemara analyzes the Tzadei HaSafek. What should be a problem in this case? And the answer is it's not Ma'alim B'Kodesh. It's certainly not Morida B'Kodesh, but you don't have the extra kiyum of Ma'alim B'Kodesh. Kevin de lo Ma'ali lei also. You're not allowed to sell something for the same identical level of kedusha. You've got to sell it for the sake of a higher level of kedusha. Or shall we perhaps say that we have to allow you to sell a Sefer Torah for something, because that's the highest level of kedusha that we know of. And if you're not going to sell it for another Sefer Torah, then you won't be able to sell it at all. So you have an old Sefer Torah, you want to buy a new one. Now, I'm not sure about one thing. Maybe you could help me with this. I don't know. In the case of Yashan Liknos Bo Chadash, Gemara says that it might be a violation of Ma'alim B'Kodesh v'lo Morida B'Kodesh. Because Morida B'Kodesh means when you sell something that has Kedusha for something that's on the same level of Kedusha. It's got the identical intensity of Kedusha if you give it a number from 0 to 10. But would you say that in such a case, when you are violating the Ein Morida B'Kodesh, that we're going to apply the rule of, well, there's nothing else he can buy. This is the highest level. If you reach the, what is it called in, in the fair, you go to a fair and you hit the thing with a hammer and the ball goes up and you hit the red thing on top. I don't know what the word is to describe that. But you got, in the case of Sefer Torah, you're really on the highest level. You can't go beyond Sefer Torah. So therefore, we're going to allow you to sell a Sefer Torah. No. I don't think that's what the Gemara means. The Gemara means that since you're going from the one Kedusha to the same Kedusha, then we're going to allow you to sell a Sefer Torah, a Yashan, for the sake of a Chadash, because there's no violation of Ma'alim B'Kodesh. And even though you're not elevating the Kedusha, that might be a violation of the Ein Morida B'Kodesh, but nevertheless, for the sake of allowing you to sell a Sefer Torah, because there's no other option, what are you going to sell it for? You can't buy the Beis HaMikdash with it. Tashma, Avol machru Torah lo yichu sfarim. Okay, we saw this already in our Mishnah. You're enjoined from selling a Sefer Torah for the sake of buying an individual Sefer of Tanakh. Kikam Rinon. Wait a minute. I don't understand what's going on. Sfarim hudalo haTorah b'Torah shapir dami. The entire Easter here is because you're going down at a level of kedusha. Why didn't the Mishnah tell me a bigger chish? And even if you're on the same identical level of kedusha, it's still prohibited. Apparently, from the fact that Mishnah chose this case where you're selling a Sefer Torah to go down a level to Sfarim, that's what's awesome. But there's no prohibition if you're going on the same level, like the case of a Yashan or a Chadash. Sfarim hudalo haTorah b'Torah shapir dami. So now the Gemara rejects. Masnisin b'di'evet kika b'ybayla lechatchil. You're right that if you already sold the Sefer Torah, that's what we call l'shanot uvdot bashetach. You've changed the facts on the ground. You already sold the Sefer Torah. So what are you going to do with it? You're going to take that money and invest it in another Sefer Torah. Hopefully you'll get an upgrade and you'll buy a chadash. But our suffix, when we vacillated back and forth in the Gemara, Ibailuhu, Ma'u Limkar Sefer Torah Yashan, Likach Lo, chadash. That was a case where we were asking, what's the opposite of post facto? A priori, or whatever the language is. Right. Up front, before there are no facts on the ground. I want to know: am I permitted to sell a Sefer Torah Yashan for the sake of buying and replacing it with a Sefer Torah Chadash? And that's called lechatchila. You're right. B'di'eved, you sold the Sefer Torah, and it was a Yashan. Use the funds, direct them towards buying a Sefer Torah Chadash. But am I allowed lechatchila to sell a Sefer Torah Yashan for the sake of buying a Sefer Torah Chadash? That's a very interesting question, very intriguing, very profound. I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly you can't prove it from the fact that you're not allowed only to sell a Sefer Torah for Sfarah, but you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah.
Not sure what the issue would be. What would be the issue? It's not more reading Bakodesh if you're going to buy the proceeds for another Sefer Torah. So why wouldn't you be able to do it?
So Mila Bakodesh means that if you want to switch one object that has a sanctity and get rid of it for the sake of replacing it, you need Mila Bakodesh. It's not enough that you tell me, well, I didn't lower the Kedusha. Who gave you the right to sell a Sefer Torah? We need a matir for that. The Gemara answers, Tashma, I have a proof from a different brisa. Go in Sefer Torah b'mitpachos chumashim. What we have is individual chumashim, and they are wrapped with a mantle, as we call it. The Gemara calls it mitpachos. Now, in modern Hebrew, for example, they use that word, a mitpachas. Okay, so far we're learning about Galila and which wrappings and which mantle you use on a Sefer Torah. And the Gemara says that if you have mitpachos that were designated for chumashim, you're allowed to upgrade them and use them for a Sefer Torah. And that surely is a fulfillment of Mila B'Kodesh. Now, Kumashim b'mitpachos neviim uksuvim. Now, let's compare the two. We have neviim and ksuvim. Each one is a sefer, or it can be broken down into multiple sfarim. and you have a wrapping over chumashim. And both the Chumash and the Nevi'im Uksum have something striking in common. They both refer to one book of the holy books of the Kisvei HaKodesh. So if we assume that a Sefer Torah Chadash does not fall shy of the Kedusha of a Sefer Torah Yashan, they all belong to the same realm. I mean, it's one Sefer Torah, another Sefer Torah. It's not like this case of Nevi'im Uksuvim b'mitpachos Chumashim. Right, a Chumash is way down on the hierarchy of Kedusha. And now you want to use the mantle of a Chumash for the sake of you want to wrap the Chumashim, so you want to take the mitpachos that were designated for a Sefer Torah and change the Seder, let's change the designation and use it for Chumashim. That would certainly not be Ma'ila B'Kodesh. But what about the opposite? Let's say you'd want to take the mitpachos of Nevi'im Uksuvim, l'mashal, and redesignate it for a Sefer Torah. That should certainly be allowed. So if you had mitpachos of Chumashim, mitpachos of Nevi'im Uksuvim, and now you want to upgrade those mitpachos to the level of a Sefer Torah. So that surely is permissible. But to use the mitchos of a Nevi'im Uksuvim down to Chumashim, that's prohibited. Or to use the mitchos of a Sefer Torah for Chumashim, that for sure is prohibited. I'm not sure exactly, maybe we'll see it later on, but why did this Brisa have to bother telling me, Lo Chumashim and mitchos Sefer Torah? We know that Sefer Torah is greater than Nevi'im Uksuvim. And Nevi'im Uksuvim cannot be wrapped with a lower kedusha of Chumash. So how much more so that you can't wrap a Chumash with mitpachos of a Sefer Torah. In any event, let's see, what does the Gemara want to prove from this brisa? What we see in this brisa is that Golalim, Sefer Torah, b'mitpachos Chumashim. That's called Ma'ila B'Kodesh, right? You're taking it from a lower kedusha of Chumashim, and you're upgrading it to the level of a Sefer Torah. Mitpachos Chumashim in, mitpachos Sefer Torah low. The chiddush of using or redirecting the wrappings of the Chumashim and use it for the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, I mean, that's something that we understand intuitively. But the chiddush here, by implication, is that mitpachos Sefer Torah lo. Meaning you cannot wrap a Sefer Torah with the mitpachos of another Sefer Torah. If we see that you cannot transfer mitpachos from one Sefer Torah to the other, then we should, by analogy, draw the conclusion that you would not violate the Sefer Torah's Kedusha by using it to gather proceeds, in this case, for the sake of again, to use mitachos of the Sefer Torah, that would be awesome. We're only allowing you mitachos chumashim writes here in the note, just as one violates the Torah scroll's sanctity, by his machal the kedusha Sefer Torah, by using its wrappings for another Sefer Torah, so there's no heter. I'm trying to figure out the logic here. I understand the diuk. I mean, the only prohibition that's spelled out here is when you take it down to a lower level of kedusha, but two equal levels apparently is mutter.
So you're trying to figure out the logic of why two equal levels is mutter?
In other words, he's basically saying that you can allow for Mila B'Kodesh, but if it's not Mila B'Kodesh, now we spoke about selling a Sefer Torah for the sake of another Sefer Torah. The Gemara is equating it to the case where you want to use the mitmachos, the mantle of one Sefer Torah, and transfer it for another Sefer Torah. And we're deriving from this brisa with a diuk that that's prohibited. Why? Because you're not Mila B'Kodesh.
Right.
And you see clearly from this brisa that the absence of Mila B'Kodesh is equal to Morida B'Kodesh, and it's awesome. So you want to sell one Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah, you're not allowed to do so.
No, but wait, doesn't the Sefer say that that's allowed?
It says you're allowed to take mitfachos chumashim, which is on a lower level,
Right.
and you can jack it up to a higher level by redirecting it towards the Sefer Torah.
No, but height Torah, but Torah, Shapir Dummy.
Oh, you're ahead of me. Okay, so wait, I fell behind you. So let me just catch. Okay. I'll quickly catch up to you. So mitfachos, right? Chumash in mitfachos Sefer Torah lo.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah,
right. So you're not allowed. This is what I'm trying to explain in my mind, at least, that you're not allowed to use mitfachos of a Sefer Torah.
Okay.
From one Sefer Torah to another, to transfer a mantle from one Sefer Torah to the other. And if that be the case, then if you're not Mila B'Kodesh, you're considered to be Morida B'Kodesh. Right. And the same thing should apply if you want to sell a Sefer Torah for the sake of buying another Sefer Torah. Right. They're not doing any Mila B'Kodesh, and therefore it's also becomes like Morida B'Kodesh. So the Gemara says, "Hey, Sefer." What does it say in the Sefer? It says, "V'lochu mashim b'mitpachos Sefer Torah." Right, that would be Moridim B'Kodesh.
Right, that's Moridim, right.
So this is a classical case of what's called diukim sosrim. You know, from the ratio we derive one conclusion, from the Sefer the opposite conclusion in that middle case that was left out.
Okay.
So from the perspective of the Sefer, that you can't take the mitbachos of Chumashim and replace them with the mitbachos of a Sefer Torah, you derive the opposite conclusion. Or Torah v'Torah Shabbatom, you'd be allowed, as long as you're not lowering the level of Kedusha,
Right.
it would be mutter, even if it's Torah b'Torah. So from the ratio, we derive the conclusion that mitpachos Sefer Torah low. But from the Sefer, we derive the exact opposite conclusion, that Torah b'Torah shaperdom, it's allowed. And again, it's a twofold nafkamina. Number one, to sell a Sefer Torah and buy another one with its funds. And the other nafkamina is to take the mantle from one Sefer Torah and use it on another Sefer Torah. That also is prohibited. But the Gemara says, "Elamio lekala mishmamim." I can't prove it one way or the other. We'll never know which diuk is correct. Toshma, meinichem Sefer Torah al gabi Torah. This is fascinating. You're allowed to put up one Sefer Torah on top of another Sefer Torah. And that's not considered a violation of the Kedusha of the first Sefer Torah that's serving for the second Sefer Torah. In other words, when you put something on top of something that has Kedusha, it's like you're using it. You're benefiting from it. It's kind of like you're being moel b'Kedusha. Again, we're not talking about Kedusha's Mizbeach here. We're talking about the Kedusha of an object, in this case of a Sefer Torah. But that Kedusha is on such a high level that although you could take a Sefer Torah and put it on Chumashim, but you're not allowed to do the reverse. So I would say the following. The common link here in all these three cases, these three nafkaminas, is when you are, in a sense, doing something which should not be permitted unless you're Ma'ila B'Kodesh. But in the absence of Ma'ila B'Kodesh, we don't sell a Sefer Torah. We don't strip it of its mantle. And now we don't put anything on top of the Sefer Torah. If you take these three nafkaminas together, they all emanate from the same fundamental point, that you're not doing the right thing unless you raise the level of Kedusha. The matir is going to be Ma'ila B'Kodesh. And if you don't reach that level of Ma'ila B'Kodesh, then you're in violation of this prohibition. Right. You must get to the point of Ma'ila B'Kodesh. Then the Brisa continues. This is a little bit less relevant to us right now, but it says V'Torah al gabi chumashim. You're allowed to put something on a chumash, in this case, something that has a greater kedusha, and that's a Sefer Torah. The chumashim al gabi neviim uksuvim. So it's really interesting here, because until this point, we've been talking about a Sefer Torah. Now, all of a sudden, the Gemara pulls a fast one on us, and if you blink, you could miss it, and switches our channels to Chumashim. It doesn't say Vitoros al gabe neviim uksuvim. Now, let's make an important distinction here. In 3 cases, we're only going to allow you to do what you want to do with the Sefer Torah if it's Mylin B'Kodesh, but not on the same level, one Sefer Torah for the other. But those 3 cases, I think, fit into 2 different categories. One category is the Sefer Torah Gufa. For example, to put something on the Sefer Torah or to sell a Sefer Torah. The third case of a mantle, that's a little bit different. By shifting the mantle from one Sefer Torah to the other, I am not undermining the kedusha of the Sefer Torah Gufa, but the mantle apparently has a halach of tashmishe kedusha, since it serves to help the, it serves to help the Sefer Torah and protect it. That's called tashmishe kedusha, and therefore it has almost the same status as the Sefer Torah. And the Gemara therefore believes that just as you're not allowed to sell a Sefer Torah, you're not allowed to put something on top of a Sefer Torah, you're not allowed to transfer the mantle from a Sefer. It's almost like the Sefer Torah makes a kinyan, that's called tashmishe kedusha, and we expand the scope of the Sefer Torah to include the mantle. Toshma menichem Sefer Torah dabi Torah. So you see that if they both have the same level, there's a permission to put one on top of the other, despite the fact that it's not Mylin B'Kodesh. It's on the same level, identical kedusha. B'Torah al gabi chumashim. Now, I don't know why the Brisa feels compelled to have to tell me that. I mean, you've already told me a bigger chiddush. You're allowed to put a Sefer Torah on top of a Sefer Torah. Certainly, you're allowed to put a Sefer Torah on chumashim. If you're allowed to put it on top of another Sefer Torah, it goes without saying. Oh, but here's a chiddush. How do we compare the level of kedusha of a chumash, which is only one of the 5 books of Moses, to a sefer of Nevi'im, of Malachim, of Shoftim, of Yoshua, of Shmuel? And the Brisa says, Chumashim al gabi Nevi'im uksuvim. Interesting. Which means one of 2 things. Either it means that a chumash and a sefer both have the identical kedusha, and then it's like one Sefer Torah on the other. Or more likely, what it means is that the sanctity of a chumash, even though it's only 1/5 of the Torah, is greater than any complete sefer whatsoever of Nevi'im Uksuvim. Now, let's say he wants to do the reverse. Well, if they both have the same identical kedusha, then he should be allowed to flip it around and put Nevi'im Uksuvim on top of Chumashim. But the Brisa says explicitly, "Have a low Nevi'im Uksuvim al gabi Chumashim," which means that the sanctity of Chumashim is greater and supersedes that of Nevi'im Uksuvim. And certainly, below Chumashim al gabi Torah. And once again, we ask the question, what's the chiddush here? For sure, you're not allowed to put a chumash on a Sefer Torah. Chumash is one of the 5 books. It doesn't have the sanctity of a full, complete Sefer Torah. But in any event, what does our sugi want to derive from this brisa? You see that the only problem and the only situation where we cannot give you license or permission is when you're doing a morid in B'Kodesh. You're lowering the level. But if you're on the same identical level of kedusha in the case of hanacha, that's mutter. We don't require ma'ilin b'kodesh. All we require is that you're not morid b'kodesh. And therefore, if you want to sell a Sefer Torah for the sake of buying another Sefer Torah, you should be allowed to do so. So the Gemara rejects this. And honestly,
Right.
I couldn't believe that the Gemara was good. I thought this is what you call an eisen araya. This is like an ironclad proof. No. The Gemara says, Hanocha Kamrit, you want to prove something from the laws of Hanocha? Yeah. In Hanocha, I'm going to be permitting going from one level to the same level. They're all on the same level. That's not as drastic as selling a Sefer Torah. Shiny Hanocha, Dilo Efshar. Meaning, what if you don't have a place to put down the Sefer Torah? So put it down, one Sefer Torah on top of the other. But again, what I really think the Gemara is saying here on a deeper level is that Hanocha is not a big deal. It's not a terrible insult to the Sefer Torah. The Gemara dresses it up by saying, because you have no other place to put the Sefer Torah down. Te'ilo te'mahachi. I'm going to show you that there's more lenience and license for Hanocha than there is with regard to Mechira. Michrech hechi karchina. Right? We do glila on a Sefer Torah. V'haka yasiv dapa achabrata. By definition, when you do glila, you roll a Sefer Torah, one level of the Sefer Torah, one part of the Sefer Torah is going on top of the other Sefer Torah. You can't avoid that. So again, Hanocha is a different situation. I'm not insulting the Sefer Torah in the case of Hanocha, unless I lower the Kedusha. But on the same level of Kedusha, that's not an insult to the Sefer Torah, because what option do I have in terms of Hanocha? Hanocha doesn't leave me with too many options. Tashma, but let's prove it from something else. That's about as explicit as you can get. We want to know if you could sell one Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah. And it says here explicitly you're not allowed to do that. So I thought this was like hands down, it's black and white. It's as explicit as you can get. So what says name? Hasam mishum pshiusa. It's a funny kind of thing. You sell a Sefer Torah, and what do you do with the funds? The monies that you receive as payment from the purchaser have to be locked up in a safe, because you're only allowed to do one thing with those funds, and that's buy another Sefer Torah. Who's going to be in charge of lock and key? We don't have anyone who is so reliable. We're calling a Shmir Ma'ula. In Hilchah Shmir, you have Shmir Pchutza, you have Shmir Ma'ula. Who can reach that level of Shmir and guarantee us that those funds will only be earmarked for the purchase of another Sefer Torah? In the meantime, those Mos have Kedusha Sefer Torah. The Domim is a Tachlifin for the Sefer Torah, and you might use it for who knows what. Maybe you'll buy Kumashim, maybe you'll buy Sfarim. Kika Amrina could go into the Ksiv Umanach Lefruke. We're talking about a Sefer Torah that has already been written, and there it is. In other words, we don't have any kashash that you're going to hold on to the funds and delay buying another Sefer Torah until you find one, and who knows what's going to happen to the most and the dumb. In the meantime, we're talking about a case, Kigon, Tiksiv, the other Sefer Torah was already written, and there it is. Menach lefruke. It's waiting for a buyer, so to speak, for a house, for a home to take it in. And that's what we want to know. Here, there's no kashash of pshia. That's not an issue at all. We don't have to worry about the fact that the domim will be misappropriated. With the passage of time, we got a Sefer Torah right here in front of us. Take the domim, of one Sefer Torah after you sell it and use that dummy to buy this other Sefer Torah that's right here on the table. We say you're not allowed to do that because it's not Mailim B'Kodesh. We don't sell a Sefer Torah unless it's Mailim B'Kodesh. Now, there are cases in which we are allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. Rare cases. For example, for the mitzvah period of a riv. So Tashma, the Omer Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Meir, Ein Mochrin Sefer Torah L'Limo Torah V'Lisa Icha. Somebody needs to be supported while he studies Torah. We're allowing you to sell a Sefer Torah, or for the sake of getting married. You need the money to pay a dowry, for the the father of the girl, or whatever it might be, and we're going to allow you to sell a Sefer Torah. Ishma mina Torah b'Torah shapim. If we're selling a Sefer Torah for the sake of Talmud Torah, then why can't we sell a Sefer Torah for the sake of another Sefer Torah? So the Gemara says, no. Talmud Torah is even greater than the chefta of a Sefer Torah. It has a higher level of Kedusha. On the hierarchy, it's even greater. What's the purpose of Talmud, if not to bring you to Maisa, to learn the halacha, know Maisa how to live as a Jew and fulfill God's will? That's the highest level of Kedusha you can get, is it not? And we were created in order to fulfill God's will. That's what we're here for. Oh, but what about getting married? It's a nice thing. Unless you're going to tell me that period of Arivia is the highest mitzvah that there is, even greater than Talmud Torah. And the Gemara says, Ishanami lo so bra la sheves yitzara. We're going to allow you to sell a Sefer Torah for the purpose of marrying off a young woman. And that's called lo so bra. God did not create the world for tov, to be desolate and void. La sheves yitzara. He created the world for being settled, meaning that that people should live in the world. So you have to have children in order to live in the world, otherwise zero population growth. Aval Torah b'Torah lo. But you want to prove from here that you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah? No, it's Mailim B'Kodesh. And Talmud Torah, and even Lisa Isha is Mailim B'Kodesh. And therefore we're going to allow you to do. But to sell one Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah, who says you're allowed to do? Torah Rabbanu learned to the Brisa, Lo Yimkar Adam Sefer Torah Afal Pisheinu Tzarech Lo. Let's say, for example, he has a number of Sefer Torah. This happened to my father's shul in Flatbush in Brooklyn after the war in Yom Kippur War in 1973. There was a bikush. There was a request for Sefer Torah in Eretz Yisrael. My father said, we have tons of Sfarim, extra Sfarim. Let's ship them off to Eretz Yisrael. Which we in fact did. In any event, you want to sell a Sefer Torah, and you have other Sifrei Torah, and yet the Brisa says Lo Yimkar. There's a separate Isser of selling a Sefer Torah. Al Kain, Omer Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, afilu ein lo masha yochal, u'machar Sefer Torah, obito eino roes simon bracha liolam. If he sells a Sefer Torah, even because he's starving, he has nothing to eat, he can't put food on the table. Again, it's not a pikuach nefesh situation. Pikuach nefesh overrides everything, but he's in very dire straits. He's not actually starving. And the Torah says that a father is allowed to sell his daughter for a Amavriya. But nevertheless, although the Torah allows it, in a row of Simon Bracha Liolam. Like the Gemara speaks about doing malacha on Tisha B'Av. You might be technically permitted to do malacha on Tisha B'Av, but don't expect to get great benefits from that malacha. Now we go on. V'chein b'mosreihem. What is v'chein b'mosreihem? Let's say you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah or some other Chefetz the Kedusha in order to buy something that's Ma'ila B'Kodesh for greater sanctity. And the Mishnah says that all these restrictions about what you do with the proceeds when you sell a Sefer Torah, they apply to any Mosros, even Mosros Seyam, even some monies that are left in the pot. In other words, you sold one Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah, or from Chumashim to Sefer Torah, and guess what? You have a surplus of monies, and all the strict laws that apply to the money that you sold for the value of the Sefer Torah apply to the Mosros as well. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava lo shanu ela shemachru v'osiru, aval gavu v'osiru muter. There's a difference between a case where the mechira already went through and where you're collecting funds in order to buy a Chefetz the Kedusha. When the monies came through and you have leftover money, then and only then the Mishnah says v'chein v'mosroseim, that the Mosros have the same status as the Damim themselves. But in a case of Gavu, so let's say you made a campaign, a fundraiser. Today they have matching and all that stuff. So you made a fundraiser, and guess what? People, very hard to believe, but they contributed more than what you need. So in such a case, says Rava, that money is chulin. It has no status of kedusha whatsoever. So imagine the case he has here in the note of collecting funds for the building of a Sefer Torah. I'm sorry, for the building of a Beis HaKnesses. This is what's going on here in Israel right now, in Efrat and other places. So those monies, the Damim, do not automatically have the status of the synagogue, the kedusha of the Beis HaKnesses. Why? Because this is only what we call dvarim shebalev. It's mentally we've designated these funds for the purpose of buying and building a Sefer Torah, a Beis HaKnesses. Esvei Abai challenges Rava. It says in the Brisa, when does the Mishnah allow using the proceeds? That's only shalo hisnu, aval hisnu afilu duch susya mutter. So this is called a Tanai. You remember, I think we had it also, I'm not sure if we had it in Clanton Park, but I remember one of the shuls I davened in had this issue. They were making kiddushim in the Beis HaKnesses. Where was it? The Bayit, maybe? Maybe it was in the Bayit.
Yeah. In a Stiebel, it often happens, yeah.
In Stiebel, it's Meisim B'chol Yom. So they always tell you it was built al Tanai, that when they built the Beis HaKnesses, they made a condition that they'll be allowed to use it for their own purposes, but for Kiddush. Hopefully not too much whiskey at the Kiddush. That's a different issue. And the basis for this allowance of eating in a Beis HaKnesses because of a Tanai is right here in the words of Abaye. And that is Hisnu, if they made a condition that they're collecting funds and they're allowed to use those funds for anything they want, even for David Shalchulin, then afilu liduchsusya, you're allowed to use the funds. What is duchsusya? It's probably a Greek word, or at least it's Greek to me. So the Gemara asks, Heichi Domi. What is the Brisa referring to? If they sold the Sefer Torah, for example, and they collected funds from the buyer, and now there's leftover funds. So ki hisnu my hobby. It has nothing to do with tonight. You can't make a t'nai on domim. They're going to come into the possession of the seller down the line. Ella, says the Gemara, this is Abaye, Shegavu vosiru, they collected funds for the purpose, earmarked for the purpose of building a synagogue, and now they have Mosar, they have leftover Mos, they don't need all the Mos, halavai by every campaign. Rice is telling you that when they collect funds, they can make a t'nai and say that whatever funds we need to purchase or build the Beis HaKnesses has Kedusha, and the balance, the extra money that is coming in from collections, that is Chulun. Where it says, T'naima de hisnu ha'lo hisnu lo. Why is it necessary to make a t'nai? We have a principle called Dvarim shebelev kol adam, which is otherwise known as an umdad de mukach, and we have circumstantial evidence that indicates quite clearly what the intention was. We don't need to set up a t'nai and stipulate it explicitly and enunciate it. All we have to do is understand what. So why were they collecting these funds? In order to buy build a shul or buy a shul. Now they see there's extra funds. Why did they have to make a condition? The Olam, says the Gemara, rejecting Abaye, Shem machru vosiru. They sold the Chefza Kedusha, and they purchased something which has greater Kedusha, but now they have money left over. V'hachi kamar, this is what the Brisa has in mind. Amedvarim mishlo hisnu shiva tuvei ha'ir b'mamad anshe ha'ir. Aval hisnu shiva tuvei ha'ir b'mamad anshe ha'ir is afilu liduchsusya nami mutter. So who's in charge of selling a Beis HaKnesses? It's the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. These are the representatives of the entire tzibur, the community of that city. And if the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir make a stipulation in the presence of the people that they represent, the people of that city, that there's a t'nai, and they're allowing these proceeds, if need be, to be used for chulin. And under those circumstances, because they made a t'nai, they can earmark the funds, or shall we say, redirect the funds, in order to hire a duchsusya. We don't know what it is yet. My duchsusya, Amar lahem, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshes, Parasha de Masa, a duchsusya. What is this duchsusya? Right, Mishmilach, did you possibly hear from Rav Sheshes, your Rebbe, what is duchsusya? And he told them, duchsusya is none other than a parsha de masa. It's like, you send mail from one city to the other, that official governmental mail and communications and documents, they sent it with a duchsusya, a parsha de masa. So once again, we see that in order to permit use of the surplus funds that were collected, you need a t'nai of Shiva Tovei Ha'ir, B'maimad Anshe Ha'ir. Amar Abai, Hilkach Hai Tzurmi Rabbanon, Dishamale Milsa V'lo Yoda Pirusho, a scholar who heard a piece of Torah and he didn't know how to define it. He should find someone who frequently is in the presence of the Rebbe. And that means that whenever there's a Fabregan, he's there. The Rebbe goes from one place to the other, he's there. He's Shchiach Kamei D'Rabbanan. It's impossible that he didn't hear from some great man. Okay, this is where we'll stop for today. And
okay, Shkoyach, very good.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I apologize for the late start.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. All good.
Oh, great. Best regards.
Okay, take care.
All right, Colton. Omar. Right, Omar Abaye. Hilkoch. Hi, Tzurmi Rabbanon to Shamale Milsa V'lo Yoda Pirucho L'Shaile Kavi D'Shchiach Kamei Rabbanon. You should always ask someone who's around the Rabbanon. He does Shimush. D'lo Efshad Lo Shliele Min Gav Rabbi must have heard the answer from a great man. Omar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Meir B'nei Ha'ir Shaholchu Le'ir Acheres. So the people of one town now end up in a different town. Upasku Aleim Staka. So it means that while they're in the first town, they were being taxed for the local community chest, for the charity of that town. Nosnin. They should give that amount that they were posek stuck of because they were still in town. They hadn't yet been oker them makom on a permanent basis yet, even though that's their intention. Ukshem bayin, when they return back to their original home, mevian osa imahen, they can bring the money home with them. In other words, when they're ready to return home, they can get a refund on their contributions because they already gave the contribution before they left home. Now they have a right to say, well, we don't have to give here. We gave there. This is also what we learned in the Brisa B'nei Ha'ir Shaholchu L'Ir Acheres. People of one town packed out. They went to a different town. Upasku Aleim Staka. Nosnin. Ukshem Bayin Meviin Osa Imayin. When they return home, they can bring refunded contributions with them. The Yachid Shaholach L'Ir Acheres Upasku Olav Staka. Now we're not talking about a group, but rather an individual. And they taxed him for a certain staka before he went to another town. The funds that he contributed should be given and earmarked to the poor of that town. So let's say, for example, you have a community that's suffering from some calamity, then we'll dedicate those funds. Now, again, if there's a group of visitors, that was the first case. The donation here is only of an individual. And he's not going to be refunded when he leaves town. His contribution is distributed to the local poor. An individual becomes subordinate to the tzibur, whereas a group retains a separate identity. Rav Huna Gazar Kanisa, the situation was so difficult and challenging with the drought that they declared a public fast. Oh, Legabe Rav Chana Bar Chaniloi V'chol B'nei Masya. Right, so he went to the rabbi called Chana ben Chaniyoi, and the people came to Rav Huna and they participated in the Tainis. Ramalite Staka, and now the officials in Rav Huna's city levied a charity tax upon them. Fiyavu. Rav Chanina and his fellow townsmen contributed as directed. But when they were about to return all, they wanted a refund. Amrule nosva lun mar v'nezel. They said to Rav Huna, let Mar, the rabbi, return the funds that we've contributed, and then we'll be off on our merry way. Unafarnes ba and we'll use these monies to support the poor people in our town. Amalahu Rav Huna responds to them. Tanina, we learned in a brisa, When can you get a refund? That's only b'she'ein sham. On the top of Chav Zayin of Beis, El Chaver Ir. So in the hierarchy of to whom we give tzedakah, the chaver ha'ir takes precedence over the aniyeh ha'ir. And the chaver is a Torah scholar. And this Torah scholar should be wise enough to know how to distribute the funds. Shekain Daniye Didi Udidchu Alai Samchikol. How much more so? Kol Shekain is how certainly this qualification applies in our case, since the poor, meaning those in Rav Huna's town, and yours depend upon me. So Rav Huna's charity work, which was far-reaching beyond the borders of his own city. So this is where we're going to stop here on the top of Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Thank you so much.